It's almost July now. It's time to show Rutgers football some more love. I grew up about 90 minutes away from Rutgers campus, and I got to tell you, dude, this is definitely one of the seasons I've been most excited about for a long time. Now, granted, they have a brutal freaking schedule, and there are definitely some challenges being in the Big Ten and not having as many resources as some of the other top programs in the conference. But when you look at this team on paper, there's a hell of a lot to be excited about. First and foremost, returning 16 starters this season definitely gets the blood pumping a little bit. They have done a phenomenal job at, most importantly, getting homegrown talent, being able to develop those kids, and really trying to find the best balance that they can with all these kids not running off in the transfer portal. And I think a big part of that is Schiano's culture. He's done a phenomenal job at developing players, figure out which guys are right for Rutgers culture, and most importantly, just being really calculated in terms of the transfer portal. Now, granted, I think there has always been kind of some question marks in terms of the quarterback position for the past couple of years. However, they brought in Aiden Kalakamanis last season, former Minnesota transfer, threw for close to 2,700 yards last season and 18 scores. As a really underrated runner, not anything special in terms of, an arm or being able to make reads or anything like that. But especially at Rutgers, dude, the big thing is you got to be as a game manager. And I get that a lot of people kind of crap on the term game manager. However, when you're a team like Rutgers, whose bread and butter is primarily running the ball, grinding the clock, and playing gritty defense, there's nothing wrong with that, right? And when I look at this team, at least offensively, I think there's a couple of things that you're concerned about. Now, granted, in the backfield, that's mainly been your heart and soul. You have Kyle Manigai, who you're not going to have back this year. So therefore, you're going to turn to primarily your number two back, Antoine Raymond, who rushed for just shy of 500 yards and 8 touchdowns. And also, you got a really underrated guy in Florida Atlantic, CJ Campbell, who ran for 850 yards last year, 11 touchdowns. And I think somebody who's going to be a really strong fit for this program, especially as a team that primarily runs the ball first. They really have a number of offensive linemen that I think are, quite frankly, really underrated, especially in a Big Ten conference who consistently has some of the best offensive lines in the entire country. They have some really good kids, and I think they're going to turn some attention to some other teams on the schedule too. I mean, when you look at, veteran center Gus Zalakis, who should easily be, first team All-Star Big Ten. And then you also have Kawabina Asamo, who I think is probably the best blocker that they have on this team. So they've really done a good job at really kind of building the foundational pieces to really keep being consistent and keep being relevant and ever so changing college football. And I think the one thing I've always loved about Greg Schiano is, say what you want about his success at Tampa and say what you want about the whole thing at Tennessee not working out, but wherever he's gone, whether it was being defensive coordinator at Ohio State or whether it was his first run at Rutgers to right now, everybody always says so many positive things about him, and it's a testament to him as a coach. It's a testament to him as a person. It's a testament to his identity and his vision. And as far as I'm concerned, I think Greg Schiano is going to be one of those guys where he can stay there really as long as he wants. I always kind of compared him to Dave Clawson. He's a program builder. He's going to bring stability, and he's going to be a guy that's going to get the football program a little bit more excited. I mean, Rutgers is definitely more of an academic school. It's definitely a little bit smaller in terms of some of those NIL resources, and that's never really been their main demographic anyway. They've always kind of relied upon getting the right guys in the door, being able to develop them the best that they can, and really trusting the process and being as patient as possible as they can. Now, granted, I think there's going to be some question marks in the wide receiver room. However, when you look at the running backs that they brought in, who I think fans should really be excited about, you return your quarterback this year. Now, granted, your backup, Gavin Winsett, transferred to Kentucky, so that's obviously not ideal. However, when you have an offensive line that has a number of returning starters, and most importantly, guys who are experienced, not just guys who were backups last year or underclassmen. These are guys who have actually taken real legitimate snaps and have played a lot of Big Ten opponents. So that's something that I think really a lot of Rutgers fans should really be enthusiastic about. And granted, I think another thing that I'll mention real quick too about the offense before we turn our attention to the defense is the fact that Rutgers finished sixth in the Big Ten last year in points per game, just shy of 29 points. And considering that if it wasn't for the last second play that happened at Illinois, they really should have finished last year, going 8-5 overall and being 5-4 in the conference instead of, another 7-win season. And granted too, yeah, you're going to have some challenges here and there, but at the same time too, they're going to do the best that they can. They're returning a bunch of offensive linemen. You have Ian Strong and KJ Duff, who I think, yes, they are in terms of production, they're the top two guys. However, they're not necessarily guys that you're going to watch on film and say to yourself, hey, these guys are, stand out or anything like that. But at the same time, too, Rutgers has never really been that type of team that needs to make big explosive plays and do all that. I mean, they're more or less, there for when you have those crunch third down situations, when you incorporate a little bit of play action in there too. And especially when Calicamanus is really an underrated thrower too, I think that's something that they can experiment with as well. But turning to the defensive side of the ball, I got to say, I mean, there's a lot to unravel here. Most importantly, I kind of want to bring up a couple of the additions that they brought in. The guy that I'm most excited about is Eric O'Neill, who's coming in from James Madison, and Bradley Weaver coming in from Ohio, who combined have 21.5 sacks last year. And considering that the Scarlet Knights only had 22 sacks last year, if they can translate that ability to this campaign this season, I think it's something that's going to be desperately needed. Because when I watched Rutgers football last year, the big two things that kind of stuck out to me is one, the pass rush has really kind of been underwhelming, all things considered. They haven't had a guy who's had more than 5 sacks since the 2016 campaign. So that's kind of something to keep your eyes on and something that hopefully they can kind of resolve this year as well. And most importantly, I think this is another stat that is really worth pointing out as somebody who's watched a lot of Rutgers football and as somebody who hasn't gotten a chance to see as many games. However, if you're just kind of the person who looks at the box scores and all that stuff, anytime that they've allowed more than 24 points, this is more for last season, but anytime they allowed more than 24 points, which they did 5 times last year, they lost all those games. And they finished 17th in the Big Ten in total defense. So it's one of those things where on paper, it definitely looks a lot worse when I kind of go in and talk about all those stats and whatnot. However, when you're kind of looking at this full picture and you realize that a lot of the different pieces that they're putting in, it definitely gives you a different perspective and another kind of alternative to be looking at this program as opposed to saying, oh, they're not at the level of winning 9-10 games or something like that, and then all of a sudden this doesn't matter anymore. When you're looking at teams like Rutgers, for example, you kind of have to look at it in a completely different lens compared to how I would be viewing Michigan, for example, or USC. It's just a different kind of attitude that you generally have to have. But in any event, those to me is going to be one of the biggest things I'm going to be looking at because the pass rush simply wasn't there. They weren't particularly good against the run. I think they had a couple games where they let some running backs go well over $150, if not even 200 yards. And it's not that they were just 0-5 last season. Since 2021, they've been 0-22 when they've allowed more than 24 points. So, especially in the era of college football where more and more teams are scoring points, where it's kind of a shootout now, that's definitely a stat that I'm going to kind of keep my eyes on because that's kind of the problem that you have when you play a style of football like Rutgers does. It's, hey, when it's good, when you have a guy like Kyle Managai, when you got a guy like Cal Kamenis who is more or less a dual threat quarterback, and you have an offensive line that can protect the quarterback from being able to make plays and make reads and make decisions. Yeah, it's definitely generally a good recipe for success. However, when your defense is on the field the entire time and your offense can't put up more than 20 points a game, it definitely gives you a little bit of pause too, especially when I go and look at the schedule, which is ranked 16th nationally this season, which is definitely a big increase compared to being 61st last year, which is a 45-point increase, which is one of the biggest differentials in all of college football. Now, granted, a lot of people are going to push back and say, well, the only reason why they even got 7 wins in the first place is because they had a cupcake schedule. I wouldn't sit there and call it a cupcake schedule. I would definitely push back on that element of it. However, what I would like to point out is, at least when I'm looking at Rutgers this season, they have some other talented guys coming in too. I mean, Daniel Jaborn is going to be another guy. He's going to be a linebacker junior and another edge guy that I think can definitely help with the pass rush too, and someone who I think is going to be highly productive as well. But what I'm concerned about is, yes, this is definitely going to be the best team that I think Greg Schiano has had since his second run with the team. But when you have 5 road games and you have Ohio State on your schedule, you have Penn State, Oregon, Illinois, Iowa, and then 3 other teams that I would argue are caliber, bowl caliber teams. Minnesota's certainly going to get in a bowl game. Washington, I wouldn't be surprised. And maybe Maryland flirts with a 6-win season. So all things considered, I mean, I would definitely be a little bit concerned about that. However, it's just one of those things where it's definitely going to be a grind this year, but they're going to have to pull off a couple upsets here and there. I mean, I definitely look at this Minnesota game where they've always played pretty tough, especially 2 programs who, at least in terms of identity and what they try to do in terms of the offense side of the ball, are somewhat similar. And you go on the road versus Purdue, which could be another win. So, yes, is it going to be a challenge to get to a bowl game this year? Absolutely, it's going to be. And I think when we look back at this 2025 season, we're going to be talking about Rutgers in terms of, how they really operate as a culture, how much of a fit are these guys going to be, and how much are you going to be able to say to yourself, hey, these are the guys that we can kind of build upon going into next year, as opposed to, oh, well, we just won 4 or 5 games and none of this really matters too. Because that's really the big balance that I think Rutgers is trying to find. Even something Greg Schiano said in interview during spring football too, is yes, you want to find guys that can fill immediate needs in the transfer portal. But the reality is, when you're a team like Rutgers, you certainly are a development program. That's just something that they have to be, whether they like it or not. And, moving forward, I think there are going to be some challenges in terms of the schedule. However, when you look at the amount of returning production that they have, when you look at the rebuilt running back room that they have, and a couple pass rushers that are coming in who have historically been really productive, and a secondary that I think doesn't get enough credit, I wouldn't be surprised if they get the 6 wins this season.